we'll start off with this one. This one, I guess, is kind of interesting. So we'll start off with an interesting one. This one is apparently about the Tomsuck Dam failure. So I don't know anything about this dam failure. Ha ha ha. But what essay vid? It was the newest one, Doctor. It was the newest fail army. So yeah, well, exactly. So let's check it out. Let's see what this is. This is going to be, I think, an interesting one.
Early in the morning of December 14th, 2005, pumps were nearly finished filling the upper reservoir at the Tomsock Power Station, marking the end of a daily cycle. Water rose to the top of the rockfill embankment, reaching the concrete parapet wall that ran along the top of the dam. But the water didn't stop. One of the two pumps shut off, but the other kept running. And soon the water was lapping over the wall. Within minutes, those splashes turned into a steady stream, cascading over the parapet, pouring against the embankment on the other side. The rockfill eroded slowly at first, but the hole grew deeper and wider. The pump finally shut off, but it was too late. The footing of the parapet...
Hey, sorry I blocked you for a second. I forgot to adjust myself, and I accidentally blocked you guys. Blocked out the video. Okay.
And wider. The pump finally shut off, but it was too late. The footing of the parapet wall had already been undermined. The
erosion sucks, don't it, chat? Whoa. They're not in for a good time.
Wall tipped over.
No,
and
not
a
a squirter piece, a leaker.
Was unleashed down the mountainside, headed to...
This wasn't a squirter. This was a dribbler. The dam has been outed as being a dribbler. Chat, do you have a dribble problem?
Directly toward a state park. This award-winning pump storage facility, considered a model of modern engineering, immediately
they probably
became
never
a
thought
center
of it.
Intense scrutiny.
Big dog.
And what the investigations found would change a lot about the field of dam safety. I'm Grady, and this is Practical Engineering. When it was built in the 1960s, the Tomsock pumped storage plant was unlike really any other power plant in the world, at least in terms of size. South of St. Louis in the Ozark Mountains, it was designed to meet a very specific need. I've talked about pumped storage on the channel before, and Tomsock was one of the largest facilities of its time. Built by Union Electric, which eventually merged with Ameren, the whole plant is basically a battery. It's actually a net consumer of electricity, which is normally not a good thing for a power plant, but managing the power grid isn't only about how much electricity you can produce, but also when you can produce it. Large coal plants in the Missouri area could make lots of power, but they couldn't ramp that production up and down to accommodate fluctuating demand.
If you're talking about the dam, you said it was built in the 60s. At the beginning, you just said it was built in the 60s. Yeah, so it's actually no, it's like 60 years old. It's probably close. It was probably close to. Actually, at the time that it happened, it was probably 45 or 50 years old. Oh, the Hoover Dam. Oh, okay.
Throughout
Hoover
the day. So Union Electric proposed a clever solution, one that's pretty common today, but was innovative for its time. 2 reservoirs were constructed. One low on the East Fork of the Black River, and another near the top of Prophet Mountain, Missouri's 6th highest peak. Between them, a hydroelectric plant with 2 reversible turbines. When electrical demands are low, rather than reducing the output of thermal power plants, that energy can go toward pumping water from the lower to the upper reservoir, usually overnight.
Interesting.
Then when demand spikes during the day, all that stored potential energy from cheap electricity can be harvested and put back on the grid by reversing the system to generate hydropower. Of
Thank you
course,
for
you
the
don't get
follow,
all the
Shamar.
power out that you put in. Some of that water evaporates or leaks out, and there are losses of energy in the pumping and generation, but with an overall efficiency of...
That dude legit looks exactly like my junior high guidance counselor. I can't even right now.
Who knows, who knows, Big Dog, maybe he started a YouTube channel. The channel isn't named after him, but maybe he started a YouTube channel.
Of around 70%, it was more than enough to justify the enormous cost of building and operating 2 reservoirs and a power plant that doesn't produce any of its own electricity. The most striking part of the whole facility is the upper reservoir. It's just such an unusual sight, a circular dam, sometimes called a ring dike or ring levee, perched on top of a mountain. This is not usually an efficient way to build a dam. We typically construct them across valleys so that the natural topography can form the sides and back of the reservoir. With a so-called off-channel reservoir, you have to build the dam all the way around, increasing the costs and the engineering complexity.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bobcat, you're right. It's basically a failure of infrastructure. Absolutely. I remember it was on, what was it? Last Week Tonight. I saw an episode of Last Week Tonight where he was, his main story was about infrastructure. And where he was talking about, like, tiny little problems that would literally take like 5 seconds to fix if it didn't require mountains and mountains of paperwork and bullshit red tape just to get these tiny problems fixed. And because they don't get fixed, they expand or they multiply exponentially over time until it becomes so bad you can't deal with it anymore and you get catastrophic failure. And so if you address this tiny issue when it happens, you would take care of the problem. But because government has so much bullshit red tape and is all about the paperwork, it doesn't get done. My guess is something very similar happened with this dam, is that there were probably tiny little problems that if they'd been addressed immediately, the failure might not have happened. But because they weren't, we had a catastrophic failure.
There are no valleys at the tops of mountains, and that height is an essential part of
No, that's what I'm saying, Antonaci. I wasn't saying it was the immediate managers. I was saying because there's so much bullshit paperwork involved, which comes from the top down. All the bullshit paperwork and red tape, that is 100% top-down nonsense.
Facility. The power available from falling water is really simple to calculate. Multiply gravitational acceleration, the density of the fluid, the volumetric flow rate, and the difference in height called head. We can really only change 2 of these. So for a specific power output needed for a specific duration, you can trade height for flow. The greater the difference in height between the 2 reservoirs in a pump storage facility, the less water you need to move, which reduces the size of all the infrastructure and thus saves costs. The mountains in southeast Missouri provided a perfect location for the project, creating about...
Doctor, are you talking about having recesses in the top of the mountain that would sort of feed back into the pool itself? Is that what you're trying to say? Or you're just talking about having like a gutter, having like a channel system built into the side of the mountain that would divert the water safely away in case of overspill? Because in case of one, it wouldn't have helped in this situation. But in the case of 2, if you're talking like a gully or a channel or gully system, my suspicion is that maybe because of the dam structure already in place on the mountain, if they built in a channel or gully system, it either may not have properly held, well, it would have been insufficient. It would have overflowed, perhaps. That is my gut feeling. But and it may be addressed. Have the pool itself set into the mountain? I think largely it is. What we were seeing was just the top of it. Like what we're seeing here is just like the top of it. My guess is it goes very deep into it probably goes quite deep into this mountain. would be my guess.
750 feet or 230 meters of height between the upper and lower reservoirs. Actually, the whole facility is named after the highest mountain in Missouri, Tom Sauk, which was the original site for the upper reservoir until there was too much pushback about building a project there, so they moved it to a slightly lower peak nearby. And they encountered some challenging conditions during construction, forcing the engineers to realign the dam to avoid an area of weak geology, giving it that unique kidney bean shape. The original dam was built as a rock fill embankment, basically just dumping a long pile of rocks around the perimeter of the reservoir. Rock fill usually works well as an embankment if you have a good source of material nearby. It's
no,
really
it does not.
strong, it doesn't require a lot of compaction, and it doesn't settle much over time like soil fills do. One thing rock fill doesn't do well is hold back water. Too many spaces between the rocks. So concrete panels were installed all along the inside of the reservoir to make the embankment watertight. A tunnel connected a Morning Glory inlet through the mountain to the generating plant. The inlet was set into a basin 20 feet or 6 meters below the bottom of the reservoir to suppress the potential for a vortex to form as it was drained each day. The whole project was designed to be operated remotely with no on-site technicians required. Another innovation for the time, but one of the many decisions that would prove disastrous. For most of its life, the Tom Sauk station operated on average around 100 days per year, usually during the hot summer months when electricity demands were more variable between night and day. Deregulation of the electric power markets in the 1990s opened up the possibility of selling power to other utilities. Those 100 days per year went up to 300, meaning
I don't know if there's no on-site watchers. He said that it could be functioned unmanned. That just means that they didn't require employees to be there to do anything with the dam in terms of its operation. That doesn't necessarily mean they did not have, they were lacking on-site watchers, perhaps. Now, again, we may be informed otherwise.
Upper reservoir cycled up and down, often twice per day, nearly every day of the year, and that was starting to cause some problems. The upper reservoir had dealt with leaks essentially since it started operating in the 1960s. Several projects were implemented throughout its life to deal with the issue, but the increased cycles of filling and draining were only making things worse. At one point, small ponds were built beside the reservoir to capture some of the leakage and pump it back.
Tiberius Rex, thank you for the tier 1. Thank you so much. So this thing had been having problems since it was built. That's never a good sign. Honestly. Every major infrastructure overhaul in my area was done by the private sector because local government is too busy misusing public funds. Oof.
Back inside. In the fall of 2004, Ameren decided to bring out the big guns and spent more than $2 million to install a geomembrane liner to cover the entire reservoir. That essentially fixed the problem, but it caused a few new ones too. About a year later, in September 2005, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or IEEE, declared the plant an engineering milestone for its innovations in the world of electrical infrastructure. On the day before the ceremony, some of the participants took a tour of the upper reservoir and witnessed water pouring over the parapet wall on one side of the dam. The operators quickly switched from pumping mode to generation to get the water back down. They chalked up the issue to high winds from a remnant tropical storm that caused the overtopping, but just to be safe, they hired a dive inspection team to check on the level sensors, and what they saw was concerning. When that geomembrane liner was installed in the reservoir, there was valid concern that any penetrations might cause leaks in the future. But the reservoir needed level sensors installed for the control system to be operated remotely. So instead of mounting those sensors directly to the concrete through the liner along their length, the engineers tried something different. 2 cables were run between anchors at the top and bottom of the embankment slope. The conduits for the sensors were attached to those cables, minimizing the number of penetrations needed. Unfortunately, the mounting system was under-designed. Those conduits were buoyant and also subject to strong currents as the reservoir filled and emptied each day. Sometime after the spring of 2004, they had become dislodged and deflected, so the sensors inside were providing readings that were lower than the actual water level. Based on those findings, the operators decided to reprogram the control system to subtract 2 feet from the upper set point on the pumps. The original design called for 2 feet or 600 millimeters of freeboard between the top.
Oh, yeah. You guys are talking about the fracking thing and how it's, yeah, that it supposedly causes massive earthquake and stuff. Oh, yeah. Movie companies like the Asylum made whole fucking movies about that. Tiberius, thank you for the gifted. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was like, how many Asylum movies were made specifically about, like, oh, fracking is causing massive earthquakes that will literally reshape the planet? Like, that was a huge thing back, like, what? Early 2000s, I think? It's like 2000s, 2010s. They were so big on, like, no fracking. And it's like,
top of wall and maximum water surface. They figured that doubling that distance would be enough to avoid issues until permanent repairs could be made during the annual maintenance period when the reservoir was drained. Unfortunately,
I think they might have
would never get the chance. Less than 3 months after that first time someone observed the reservoir overflowing, on December 14th, it happened again, this time in the early dawn when no one was around to notice.
Oh,
Once the parapet wall collapsed, the water quickly eroded down through the dam, emptying roughly 6 billion liters or 200 million cubic feet of water down the steep mountainside straight toward Johnson's Shut-In State Park, stripping away trees and rocks as it surged.
Okay, chat. Bear in mind, these are full-size trees we're seeing here, and the water cut a swath this wide and ripped trees this size completely out of the ground. Think about that. Look at how this is an actual full-size tree. Look at the size of it. And then think of this entire area filled with those trees. Think about how huge of a swath that is. That is an incredible amount of Mother Nature not fucking around. Well, half Mother Nature. It's, you know, Mother Nature a la man's hubris.
Rocks as it surged. By pure luck, the failure happened in the winter when the park was practically empty, but the park superintendent, his wife, and 3 kids, one of whom was only 7 months old, were swept away when the water demolished their house. Incredibly, the entire family survived the event, but not without suffering from injuries and hypothermia. The wave of water flowed into the lower reservoir, where it would have gone anyway later that day, so there were no major downstream impacts. The event was investigated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and their conclusions were surprising. Like most events of this kind, a series of small oversights, which on their own wouldn't have resulted in a disaster, combined to cause hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, plus the effects on the family I mentioned.
And like I said, this is what it is with infrastructure. If you have these small problems that are seemingly insignificant at the time, and they're either ignored or they're not addressed because the level of paperwork needed to fix tiny little problems is so immense that either it's just like, fuck it, we'll deal with it later, or by the time you can finally get around to it, those problems have multiplied, sometimes exponentially. And that's why the infrastructure in America and other places too, this is not only an American problem where infrastructure is fucked. America does not have a monopoly on that, but it's like infrastructure is like one of the most important facets of a society to be functional. And when the infrastructure is not maintained, shit like this happens. And it all comes from just tiny little problems or imperfections.
Mentioned. First was the embankment. That rock fill it was supposed to have been built from wasn't quite as rocky as the engineers who designed it intended. There was a lot more soil mixed into the fill, resulting in more settlement of the embankment over time.
Wait. There was no other experience with frequent cycling of load where their dump rock fill of all sound rock would have stabilized by this time is not known. I believe if fill of 100% competent rock would have stabilized and the percentage of weathered rock is the cause. So they didn't get the right kind of fill.
Unsound areas of soil in the embankment's foundation were also not properly cleaned out.
Good night, Coyote. Have a great weekend. I hope to see you on Sunday.
From construction to failure, some parts of the parapet wall were a full 2 feet or 600 millimeters lower than where they started. That settlement wasn't taken into consideration when the level sensors were replaced after the lighting project in 2004. And with the sensors unattached...
This is getting worse and worse as it goes on. The parapet wall had sunk. I think he said it was like 6 feet. And the sensor wires were now out of alignment, so nothing was working right. Holy shit! Well, yes, I sell. Exactly. That is an excellent question.
Attached and free to move around, there was no way for the logic controllers to know the actual elevation of the water in the reservoir. Fail-safe probes were installed on the parapet wall to provide a backup that would automatically shut off the pumps if the level got too high, but they were installed in a location that was actually higher than the top of the settled parts of the embankment wall. If the water hit those sensors, it was already overtopping parts of the wall, and they were incorrectly programmed in a way that required both sensors to be activated before the pump shut off. That first site visit when the water was running over the wall didn't trigger those fail-safe sensors, but no one thought to check them. And rather than ground truth the important elevations like the top of wall and all the sensor levels, they just decided to add a couple feet of margin and postpone a permanent fix.
Like, they wanted this as a marvel of modern engineering, and from everything we're hearing, it was one colossal fuck-up. So many things were done wrong with this marvel of modern engineering at the time. And look at everything that's going wrong.
It would have been so easy to have someone on site during those last few minutes of filling the reservoir each day to verify the levels against the electronic measurements, or even a closed-circuit camera, especially after the enormous red flag of...
Now we can see the aftermath. Look at this. Okay, now we can see the depth of the dam here. Look at that. It just took the entire saw. It took this entire sheath of the dam. Wow. Look at that. That is nuts. Holy hell. Wow. All because of these small little problems that all multiplied and combined together to form one catastrophic failure.
Of seeing it happen a few months earlier, but no one knew it was overtopping, and the owner hadn't notified the regulator the first time it happened, so there was no oversight for how Ameren responded.
Wait. Let me hear that again.
The first time, no one knew it was overtopping, and the owner hadn't notified the regulator the first time it happened.
The owner? Is this thing like So not only do we have poor building, we literally have people going, nah, it'll be fine. So yeah, it is shitty on-site management too. It is a combo platter. It is 100% a combo platter of bad design and bad management. Holy fuck. And high gearbox.
So there was no oversight for how Ameren responded. Probably the most significant error of all happened well before the facility was ever built. The design had no spillway. As an off-channel reservoir, there were only two ways water could get in: rain falling on top or water being pumped in. With enough freeboard for a rainstorm and the redundancies built into the control system, the designers never envisioned a need for a way to let water safely run over the top. Unfortunately, when you rely on complicated systems for safety, the likelihood for things to go wrong goes way up. These type of events are sometimes called normal accidents, a term
there you
coined
go,
by
Taurus.
Charles Perrow. The idea is that when systems are complicated, and especially when the safety measures themselves add to a project's complexity, failures are much more likely, even expected. In other words, failure becomes normal. Compared to an industrial control system, a spillway is dead simple. Once the water gets to...
How many times have I said this, chat? How many times have I talked about the more complex you make it, the more likely it is you're going to have a failure. That's why people like having systems that are simplistic. Much more simplistic, they're solid, and they work well. Well, King? Okay, German engineering is pretty fucking complex, generally speaking. So I don't know if that's talking about complex engineering as a joke or as it's simple. Yeah. Exactly. That's like why with like cars, the modern day cars running on computer systems. There's far more chance for a modern day car to fail versus the older, more simplified mechanical cars. And the older mechanical cars were easier to fix, as long as you had the parts.
To the crest, it just goes out. They're not fail-proof. I've talked about several spillway failures in previous videos, but there are a lot fewer ways that things can go wrong. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission fined the owner $15 million for the failure, the largest penalty they've ever issued. $5 million of that went into a fund to improve the area around the project, although some recent reporting has alleged those funds have been mismanaged. The state of Missouri also sued and agreed to a $177 million settlement, much of which went toward restorations at the state park, which held a reopening ceremony in 2010. At the same time as Johnson's shut-in state park was undergoing renovation, crews were working on rebuilding the upper reservoir at Tom Sock. To avoid a relicensing process, the dam was built on the same alignment and to the same size as the original project. Rather than trying to repair the flawed rockfill embankment, Ameren and their consultants went with an innovative design. The new dam was built using roller-compacted concrete.
Quote-unquote innovative. I can't wait to hear about this.
A dry concrete mix that's handled using earth-moving equipment and compacted into place using rollers. The new design would address both the settlement and the leakage issues that the original structure struggled with, while still taking advantage of the material from the original embankment. That rock fill was crushed and processed into aggregate for the concrete, reducing the amount of material hauled to the remote site. Maybe most importantly, they included a spillway this time. The structure is the largest roller-compacted concrete dam in the United States. The plant reopened in 2010, was rededicated as an IEEE milestone, and the project won the U.S. Society on Dams Award of Excellence in the Constructed Project.
Okay, so while they're busy patting themselves on the back and saying, we're the best, is it any better? We have 5 minutes left, so let's find out. And they didn't make a gutter homely, they made like a lip. This really isn't like a gutter, it's a lip. This is an overflow lip. Not so much a gutter. So it's a lip that will allow for water to spill over the side, and I don't think they talked about there being any kind of a gutter system.
Failure at Tom Sock was a wake-up call for the professional community. The regulator, FERC, implemented some big changes to its oversight of dam safety.
Okay, Big Dog, you're asking why we didn't do this the first time? It's because the first time was built back in the 1960s. They probably didn't have that kind of engineering skill or knowledge back in the 1960s. So that's why it wasn't done the first time. Now, granted, could they have drained the dam and completely refurbed it? Or retrofitted it? Yes, absolutely they could have. But that would cost a lot of money and time, and you know that nobody, government or private, is going to do that if there isn't a catastrophic failure already. This is how it works with massive infrastructure things. Nobody wants to fix it or retrofit it until you get the catastrophic failure. Because Then it's like, okay, well, it's already broke. We're already having to fix it. So now we'll actually put money into it to retrofit it.
If
And
you
that's a
think
fail.
this is bad, you should look up the Johnstown flood caused by the Millionaire Club's failure to maintain a dam. It killed 2,200 people in the early 1930s.
Oh, lovely, you're a dog. Oh, God. Yeah, but shut down. But Blade, it's not a question of it not functioning. It's a question of paying for it. That's the big one. Paying for it.
In the wake of the collapse, they put together a task force that issued a technical guidance document specifically addressing the challenges of pump storage facilities that was circulated to the owners. They also updated rules for owners, requiring them to have an internal dam safety program and a chief dam safety engineer who's responsible for over.
I'm sorry, a chief dam safety engineer? Yeah, because of that dam safety? Yeah, it makes me chuckle every time.
Overseeing it, a role that Ameren didn't have at the time. The event triggered states as far as Hawaii to bolster their dam safety programs. And most importantly, the failure demonstrated the need for overflow spillways, even for off-channel reservoirs with redundant control systems meant to avoid overfilling.
Okay, so Big Dog, in addition to coming from, say, like, rain, there is... Let me see if I can show you. Okay, so the big boot-looking water is the lower water source that gets pumped up into the smaller kidney-shaped dam for the purposes of the hydroelectric power. So the water is coming from the much larger water source and being drawn up into the smaller body of water there. So that's where it's come from, in addition to any like rainfall. You know, any fill-in from the rainfall, which will be minimal at best.
If you're paying attention to issues related to the electrical grid, you know the importance of storage, particularly as intermittent sources of power become
being
a large part
upwards,
of our
Big Dog.
portfolio.
It's not flowing naturally,
Ways
it's
to
being
balance out
like
those
literally pumped up
mismatches in
there.
supply and demand are only becoming more important. Pump storage has traditionally been the only large-scale way to do this economically, but obviously it comes with a trade-off. Dams are among the riskiest structures that humans build. They don't fail very often, but when they do, those failures usually come with serious consequences to people, property, and the environment. And because they don't fail that often, those lessons come slowly.
Wow, okay. I'm in the way. I'm gonna move. Chat. Look at that house. Look at that house just sitting on the precipice there. Holy shit. Wow, like it's actually over fucking hanging. This is actually overhanging right there. Wow, yeah. Do you know that family before they got out of there was like, oh fuck. Hey! Oh, Andrew, I don't doubt it. This like it's only probably a matter of minutes before more of this, before the water just erodes this and it all collapses. Oh, I know. Believe me, I know. Whoops. Hang on. I'm floating. I'm floating. Hang on. Here we go. All right. Back over.
And tragically, but with battery storage becoming cheaper and much more widespread,
yeah, I know.
It'll be interesting to see how the economics of pumped storage change.
My legs are still here though, chat.
Some are predicting the US will have more than 400 gigawatt hours of battery storage on the grid. That's more than 100 Tom socks. We're right at the beginning of some major changes in how energy is stored. Those batteries have a lot of technical differences in how they interact with the grid.
Oh yeah, Taurus,
and they come with their own environmental challenges and safety considerations, but the risk profile is a lot different than building a major reservoir at the top of a mountain. As energy infrastructure keeps evolving, those differences in risks are probably going to shape the future of how we store power and at what cost. A big lesson from Tom Sock that we learn over and over again is the destructive power of water. It's something I care a lot about. It's defined my education and my career, and so I pay a lot of attention to the news about floods and disasters. For example, major flooding recently hit parts of Central Europe. There's no such thing as a purely natural disaster when it comes to flooding, and I'm always trying to understand how infrastructure is helping or hurting, like the dam that failed in Poland. There's always a push to control the narrative after a disaster, and by focusing on different details of the story, the casualties...
Yep. Chat, we've seen that recently, haven't we? Where there's an attempt to control a narrative. We've seen that in recent days, haven't we? An ad? What do you mean, is it an ad, Hoseki? An ad for what? He's just talking.
Preventative measures and response, different outlets can subtly or not so subtly change how you interpret the facts. That's why I like to use Ground News, today's sponsor. Ground News
you called it,
aggregates
Hoseki.
major news stories and adds
You
context
fucking
to make
called it.
reading the news easier and more effective.
In
Son of a bitch.
1895, Andrew Carnegie built museums and libraries. After a flood killed people here in Pittsburgh due to a dam breaking. It was caused because his business partner made the top of the dam couldn't fit his carriage, and demanded it to be made bigger while weakening the dam.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me, Spartan, Robo-Spartan. Why does that not surprise me, honestly? It's fucking rich people.
One update on the flooding was covered by 230
Oh,
outlets.
really? Is it
You can
your
see
dog?
how reading just a single one might not give you a comprehensive viewpoint. Every story comes with quick visual breakdowns and tags for political bias.
Yeah, we've
factuality,
heard
and
about this.
ownership of the sources,
The
backed
fact
by
is
ratings from
all
independent
mainstream
monitoring
news is
organizations. For
bullshit
this
these
story, you can
days.
see that 43%
Even with
of the
aggregates
reporting
even
outlets
with
lean
aggregate
left,
systems like this,
40% are center, and
all
only
of the
17%
news,
lean
all of
right.
these news
50%
agencies are just
media conglomerates,
shit.
and 73% of the outlets have been rated high factuality. They also have a feature called the
Do you mean the
Blind Spot
sluice
that shows
gates,
you
yard dog?
stories mainly covered by one side of the political
Is that what you mean, the
spectrum.
sluice gates?
Stuff you might totally miss if you only follow a few main sources for your news. Maybe
Yeah.
more than anything else, disasters shape the field of engineering. They're how we learn to do better in the future. So it's important to me to get a broad perspective on issues like what happened in Central Europe.
Blah blah.
And that way,
Word.
journalism has a lot of power over us. And Ground News
Journalism
gives
is
some
a
of that
lie
power back
these
to you.
days. There
If
is
you'd
no
like
such
a
thing
more
as pure
transparent
journalism
media
anymore.
landscape, they're offering a huge
It's okay,
discount right
Technopaths.
now
You're
at the
here
link
now.
in the description. 40% off the Advantage
I
subscription,
remember
which
that,
includes
Doctor. I
unlimited
remember.
access to all their features.
And then they tried to backtrack on it.
Ground.news/practical engineering, or just click the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think.
That's still a good video. It's very interesting. Yeah, that was still a very interesting video.